She'd gone out to meet her boyfriend. They'd agreed that she'd come out the back of the station and walk to the printing works. She never arrived.
On this railway footpath at Horsley in Surrey, a piece of nylon cord set in motion the last movements of a 15-year-old schoolgirl.
You know, how could she one day be there on the playing field with us and then the next minute have been brutally murdered?
Single females, late at night, stripped, an item of their clothing is forced into their mouth as a gag.
Nobody knows for certain, but this is very probably the last place where Alison Day was seen alive.
Whoever has done this, there's a degree of pre-planning, of calculation. This guy's not going to stop now, is he? Because people like this don't stop.
Detectives were certain she was the third woman to die at the hands of a sex attacker stalking the railways.
We have now got a serial killer on our hands.
What evidence was there? No forensic evidence, no fingerprints.
Things that we take for granted now, CCTV, DNA. Back in the 80s, they didn't exist.
He was given the inquiry with instructions to basically close it down.
Where on earth do we go from here? What do we do?
Oh my God, there were 2 men involved. They have to be taken off the street.
The killer has written us a letter.
I was 35 years old and working as a press officer, going basically to any incident that was going to be of media interest. It was a very cold month, colder than usual, I would say. I got a phone call from the press bureau to say that a 19-year-old girl had been reported missing by her father. At that time, I have an 18-year-old niece called Alison. That made me feel concerned because I thought, that could be my niece.
There was growing concern today for the safety of 19-year-old Alison. She planned to travel from Romford to Stratford by train and then change to the North London line for a one-stop ride to Hackney Wick Station.
In those days, lots of people were reported missing. What, I suppose, made this a little bit out of the ordinary from a normal missing person, there was no reason why she should have gone missing. She hadn't had an argument with her family. She had a good job, a good relationship with her boyfriend. They had become engaged, so she had everything to look forward to in her coming life. You've got this whole journey from Upminster to Hackney Wick. At any stage, she could have gone missing or been abducted.
Things that we take for granted now, CCTV, DNA, telephone tracking. Back in the 80s, they didn't exist.
In a lot of cases, it was probably more luck than judgment where you got onto the right path to follow in such an investigation.
The fact that she was a young, blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl helped enormously in getting her image into the popular papers. Red Tops would ring the press bureau on an hourly basis for news, and a missing person, the first question they'd ask was, what colour is it? Is the child or the person? And if we said black, they'd say, OK, move on. Now, that would be a shock now to people to hear that, but that was a fact, that was going on in the 80s.
There is a lot of new information. We've made appeals. The public have been very good in their response to appeals, so we've a lot of information to sift through, yes.
One of her old classmates had seen her waiting at the bus stop and had spoken to her, and she said, I'm going up to Romford railway station. Then we got a ticket collector at Stratford who said they kind of vaguely remembered a young girl coming through on a train that had come from Romford. And that's it, we don't get anything.
Nobody knows for certain, but this is very probably the last place where Alison Day was seen alive. She walked down onto the road into an area which is full of factories and derelict buildings. Police were hunting the area for the first time today. They hoped to find clues to her mystery disappearance.
I've been a career crime correspondent, 40 years on Fleet Street. Hackney Wick Station was a fairly desolate location. The station was surrounded largely by an old and semi-derelict industrial estate with a lot of things like, car breaker yards. It was a pretty grim location. The ragged end of London. Between Christmas and the New Year, people were on an extended holiday break. She was almost certainly the only person who got off the train at Hackney Wick. She might have even been the only person on the train. Put all the circumstances together and I thought, I don't think this is going to end well.
I got a phone call asking me to contact one of the officers in the case, and he told me that the underwater search unit had recovered a woman's body from the canal. She'd been raped, she'd been strangled.
Alison's body was found by police frogmen making another search of the canal. They'd already dragged it 2 days after her disappearance and had searched the banks almost daily.
I just remember my dad saying the police are coming round to have a chat with you, because no one knew anything. It was like she'd gone to meet her boyfriend, and that was the last that anyone ever saw of her.
Police are appealing for anyone who may have seen her on that journey at either Stratford or Hackney Wick stations to help them. The police are refusing to say how long her body had been in the water.
And I was just completely shocked to have her life taken away at 19.
The canal was a pretty inhospitable place, full of shopping trolleys and all sorts of rubbish that had been dumped in it. They subsequently found her coat in there as well, which had been weighted down with some concrete blocks. She was partially clothed when they brought her out of the canal.
Obviously tests were done and fingerprints. She was identified. This is now quite obviously a murder.
The body was not disturbed until a pathologist attended.
I remember distinctly when I got this phone call to say that there'd been a murder and they'd discovered the body of a girl that had been taken out of a canal. I mean, this scene actually shows 8 or 9 police officers around the body, not one of which has got protective clothing on. Nobody's got any covers on their shoes. They're all wearing suits. There wasn't much care that was given to protecting the scene in terms of contamination. When I got to the scene, it soon became clear a tourniquet was used which had been cut from her own blouse, put tightly around her neck. A knot was formed in the front of that tourniquet, and this basically forms a very, very tight ligature leading to very quick death.
It made me feel shocked, disgusted, worried and terrified that there's someone out there who's prepared to do that to a young woman and think they can get away with it.
She had, I think there was an engagement ring on the left hand, and her watch was still on the left hand.
It now immediately elevates that from a missing person story, which isn't that interesting really, unfortunately, to something much more headline grabbing and frankly, much more sinister.
She was going to see her boyfriend. She would have been happy. So she would have been probably in a really good place then. God, they're really happy. Sorry. Yeah, brings back a lot of memories.
Nine times out of 10 in a murder investigation in this country, you will learn within a day or two that police have arrested somebody who was known to the victim. This is a stranger murder. How has she got from Hackney Wick Station into the River Lee with cobblestones in the pockets of her coat, weighting her down? Whoever has done this, there's a degree of pre-planning, of calculation. It's sexually driven. It's not a robbery. She's not a member of a rival gang or anything, that might have some other explanation. Somebody was waiting for a likely victim. So what is the explanation? What sort of person are the police looking for in this case? Is this the first act in something that's going to turn out to be much more dreadful?
The latest figures show that Britain is one of the most violent nations in Europe.
The rate of recorded rapes and attempted rapes in the capital went up by 56% last year.
Can you talk to me? Some of them have been women ringing up regarding a rape that they haven't reported to the police before because they've been too frightened.
Only an estimated 10% of women report attacks to the police.
In some parts of London, there are only 10 officers to look after 70,000 people.
The assets available, as they say now, were stretched pretty thin.
There was no such thing as specialist murder investigation teams. The team were brought together from that particular geographical policing area. You could have 30 or 40 people on a large inquiry crammed into an office that was really built for 10. Tired, worn out, hungry. All our investigations were conducted on a card index. Every action, every statement was documented on a card index. The only way that you could cross-check was physically cross-checking all of the documents on that index.
I went to the porter cabins at the rear of Hackney Police Station. It was a little bit of a shambolic arrangement. You could have been walking into a building site somewhere, except that there weren't a lot of hard hats knocking around. It wasn't going to impress anyone. Certainly wouldn't have appeared in too many TV programmes. Charlie Farquhar turns up as a detective superintendent with about 27 years service or something. He was very proud of being from the Kingdom of Fife.
My dad had been in the flying squad for 3 years in North London, and then he was moved to Romford, to the murder squad, and he inherited 2 inquiries that were going on at the time. One of them was the disappearance, the murder of Alison Day, and he was given the inquiry with instructions to basically close it down. We don't have the resources and there just isn't the evidence. We're not going to get anywhere. But what he actually did was he went to the officers on the ground and basically asked them what they thought. And they all said, we want to give this another go. We haven't had the chance to give this a proper go yet. And eventually there was a showdown about this, and he said to his boss, you can close it down if you want to, but you can be the one that tells Mr. and Mrs. Day that we're not going to look for her daughter's killers anymore. I think there was a couple of problems the police were facing with this. One was the lack of resources. The Wapping newspaper dispute was an enormous issue, and so many officers were being drafted in to help on that. It was really draining funds away. The other problem with this inquiry was, on the surface, there just seemed to be no evidence. This seemed to be a random attack which they couldn't connect with anything else. There didn't seem to be any particular clues that would lead anywhere. There was no forensic evidence found on Alison at all. There was no eyewitnesses. You know, that's a hell of a task, that's a hell of a commitment, really. And you can see why the easy option would have been to say, I think this is going to just remain unsolved.
I was a member of what was known as the Crime Reporters Association. We became people that the police generally would allow you some inside track access. Charlie Farquhar actually invited me one day late at night to Romford Police Station, and he allowed me to see some pictures of the post-mortem. He said, this is a very unusual case. This is for your eyes only. And he said, she has been strangled to death with a piece of her own clothing. This is going to be a really important piece of evidence, which is why, obviously we don't know who's done it at this stage, you can't report any of that.
Police, by very nature of the job that they do, deal with dead bodies on quite a regular basis. But this was unusual in as much as, yes, there'd been a sexual attack on this girl, but on top of that, it was the method at which she had been killed, i.e. the ligature with a garrote round the neck.
At the time, I worked on the News of the World, and we had another reporter there who was a rogue reporter. A couple of weeks after this meeting I'd had with Charlie Farquhar, the story appeared in the paper that I was working for under this reporter's byline saying, police hunt guitar string strangler in the Alison Day case. Basically, he just made the story up. One of Charlie Farquhar's sergeants, who I also knew very well, rang me up. He said, do you think you could get him to come out to Romford Police Station to meet with me and Charlie Farquhar? And I said, I suppose that Charlie would like to give him a piece of his mind, would he? And this guy straight-faced said, no, Charlie would like to take him down to the cells and beat the living daylights out of him for what he's done.
He had an overwhelming morality. It was almost intimidating. I think he knew that there was something even darker going on here. He said, I remember in one interview at the time, that this is just evil. There's no underlying insanity or something. This is just evil.
Alison Day, 19 years old, was battered around the head, dragged away, strangled and dumped, hands tied, in a nearby river.
It was an uphill battle, it really was, because what evidence was there? No forensic evidence, no fingerprints. Body had been in the water for a considerable time, so obviously it was starting to decompose.
When you have a murder, there is no witness. You don't have an account of what preceded, what took place. It's a slog. It's long hours. I'm really trying to build up a picture against that constant pressure that if you don't get there, then somebody else could be next.
Marty Tamboza was a 15-year-old Dutch girl. She was due to go back to Holland on a visit, and she wanted to go to the local sweet shop to get some sweets to take back for her friends back in Holland. And she did so going along the towpath beside the railway track on her bike.
There was a length of fishing line stretched across a footpath designed to unseat somebody from a bicycle.
She suddenly comes off the bike and she's set upon. She then led away a very long distance over fields and through bushes and all sorts, and at various points she's sexually assaulted and raped, and then ultimately murdered.
Where she was living in Horsley, it's a very, very nice area. And I can imagine people down there thinking, things like that don't happen here.
We used to laugh quite a bit together, and I don't remember her being anything but sweet and fairly softly spoken and really quite charming. She was great. She was just the ideal person. We were all called in to the large gymnasium, as we called it. We were all gathered, and the headmaster, took to the lectern and said, there is we have a missing girl.
"15-year-old Marty was savagely attacked as she cycled along this footpath yesterday afternoon. She was on her way to East Horsley to buy some sweets to take with her tomorrow on holiday with some school friends to her native Holland.
Marty was a wonderful, beautiful girl whose family had come across here from the Netherlands and were living here because of Dad's work. And she was the daughter that any parent would be proud of.
Police with tracker dogs launched a massive hunt when she failed to return, and her bicycle was found last night. When the search resumed at dawn today, her fully clothed body was found by one of the Duchess of Roxburgh's workers in a copse, a mile from where the bike was dumped.
She's in the leafy lanes of what we used to call the stockbroker belt. Leafy green, well-heeled, safe Surrey. Nothing ever happens in that part of the world. It's suddenly a bolt from the blue. A teenage girl, a schoolgirl, is knocked off her bicycle, dragged into the undergrowth and murdered. That is always going to be a big story. You don't need to sensationalise the facts around that.
I think any person that takes a young life, whether it's a boy or a girl, has got to be sadistic to start with. As far as this person or persons are concerned, then they are no different. They've taken a young life, and violence has been used to do it, a considerable amount of violence.
She had injuries to her head, which subsequently were determined were caused by a blunt instrument. An attempt had been made to burn parts of the body. There was also pieces of wood laying around. Intercourse had taken place, but it would appear that the burning would have been in an attempt to destroy any forensic evidence that might have been recovered.
Scores of police officers mounted an inch-by-inch search of a wide area of woodland, whilst forensic experts used the latest laser technology in a bid to find fingerprints on Marty's body whilst it was still at the scene.
It was all over the news. It was all over the news that evening. It's grim.
On this railway footpath at Horsley in Surrey, a piece of nylon cord set in motion the last movements of a 15-year-old schoolgirl. Marty Tamboza had set out to buy sweets from a shop.
You don't even want to think about what she was subjected to, because on the news, I remember, it was just absolutely horrific. It was just horror what they showed. How could she one day be there on the playing field with us in her tracksuit bottoms, and then the next minute have been brutally murdered? I simply cannot put her there in that place.
The footpath Marty was using runs alongside a busy railway line, and police are hoping a passenger may have seen something unusual. Detectives are this evening questioning people arriving at Horsley Station in a bid to jog their memories.
One of the glimpses of the future that was happening here was the use of computers in solving a murder. And I suppose there were some people who thought, can you use computers to catch a killer? It all seemed a little bit sort of far-fetched, a bit science fiction at the time. But the Yorkshire Ripper inquiry had shown that there was something that needed to be done. They were still doing everything by hand, and it was laborious and difficult, and things were getting missed and not cross-referenced. The Surrey Police had a very early version of the Holmes database, the Home Office Large Major Inquiry System, and the fact that there was a massive information coming in which could all be put into a computer, which then you could just do a keyword search on. The man-hours that were being saved by hitting one button were extraordinary. It meant even if they weren't finding the perpetrator, they were being able to narrow down certain common denominators very, very efficiently.
Charlie Farker, who was in charge of the Alison Day investigation, which was still unsolved, was talking with John Hurst.
When he phoned the officer at Surrey who was running the inquiry, on that phone call they compared notes, how the victims had died and that sort of thing. My dad kept one vital piece of information back from the press, always as a way of being able to tell if there was a copycat or whatever. My dad said, the other thing, and we've never made this public, is that a tourniquet was used. And there was this silence on the phone. The penny suddenly dropped with Surrey that was what this mysterious piece of wood lying next to the body was. They thought that it had been used as an accelerant to burning the body. It wasn't. It had actually fallen out of the knot that had been used to strangle Marty Tamboza. So there was this pause, and suddenly quickly became obvious that there was a connection.
You've got two offences that are miles apart. The common factor at that stage that initially linked the two was railway stations. Were they using the railway system as a means of travelling?
The ligature, the tourniquet looks quite broad. It seems to have come from her clothing again. And the upper part of her clothing was again disarrayed, some of it missing. And she had string tied around the hands and legs.
These crimes involve a very specific kind of twine called som yarn. You know, it was used by carpenters or people like that, and I'm sure that somebody said to me at the time that British Rail are a big buyer of som yarn, and we're now starting to think that given the locations of the murders, both close to fairly out of the way railway stations, that are we looking for a British Rail employee?
The media at that stage linked to it as the railway murders.
And with real fears that the killer may strike again, worried parents are meeting their children off the trains.
As soon as we knew that the police were positively linking the deaths of Alison Day and Marty Tamboza, of course that takes the story into a new realm. You can, frankly, expect more terrible things to happen.
Although there was this connection, this potential connection between the ligature, and it was unique and unusual in UK murder history, there was still nothing actually physical that you could say it was the same person.
19-year-old Alison Day disappeared from her home at Upminster on December the 29th. Her body was found near Hackney Wick a fortnight later. Now a new witness has come forward who saw the two men with a girl resembling Alison on the 29th.
Following further publicity on the Alison Day murder, someone pops up in Berkshire Road in Hackney and says, "Oh, I was by a phone box in Berkshire Road and I saw a girl standing, and there were two men in sheepskin coats talking to her, and then one of them grabbed hold of her and they took her off up the road."
This was a remarkable sort of breakthrough in a way, because this was a long time after the murder, and this quite eerie artist's impression was done. And this potentially would be quite a revolution in the inquiry.
There may, of course, be an entirely innocent explanation for this meeting, but we've had nobody in the past come forward and say that they were on Berkshire Road that night, and we appeal to anybody who was there, or those two men, to come forward so that they can be eliminated from this inquiry.
That suddenly reinvigorates the investigation, and now suddenly we might be looking for two people, and one's it's little and large, one's tall or taller and the other one's quite short. Then we've got people saying, well, hang on, you've got this other investigation that's been going on about these North London attacks on women. What's going on there?
It's the biggest rape hunt in Britain, at least 23 separate attacks,
2 men are alleged to be responsible for a brutal series of assaults over the last 3 years.
In the Metropolitan Police at that time, it was an operation under the code name Heart that was dealing with a series of serial rapes. The majority of the offences that were being looked at on that, the victims who survived talked about 2 people being involved as their assailants. The link then was formed with the murder of Alison Day. And of course, because of the ligatures, the killing of Marty Tamboza.
This year, so far, the 2 men have attacked 12 times right across the Greater London area, from Hadley Wood to Richmond. Here, at 3:15 in the morning, they grabbed a 24-year-old secretary, dragged her down to this underground car park, where they raped her.
It was very, very unusual to have a series of rapes. The very fact that there was a series taking place, the fact that there were 2 people involved, I think that made it pretty unique and very, very worrying. Very, very worrying.
Police computers have established a firm link between 19 rapes, 6 indecent assaults and 2 other attacks on women. Over 3.5 years, they took place in a wide area of North London, extending into Hertfordshire and Surrey. And detectives believe the attacks are the work of 2 men operating as a team.
What I believe that we're looking for are professional rapists. They literally come out of the night, they attack the victim, they say very little, and then they disappear again.
You'd be coming into work and you'd hear, there was another rape last night. But there was mountains of statements relating to the rapes. There were 2 men involved, and one was noticeably taller than the other. There was also the type of attack itself. It's what you would consider calling a blitz attack.
At 1:15, a 22-year-old dancer was walking in Euston Road when 2 men pulled her into an alley in a mews some 50 yards away, and she was sexually assaulted. At 2:15, the same men had travelled 3 miles and were in Kentish Town Road, where they dragged a 20-year-old girl into a doorway. Although they had knives, she managed to escape. 1 hour later, they'd attacked their 3rd victim of the night, and she wasn't so fortunate.
You could see there was an element of planning involved. So it's this very frightening time of saying some of the people are out there doing some really bad stuff.
Single females, late at night or in the early hours of the morning, stripped, tape is placed over their mouth or over their eyes, or an item of their clothing is forced into their mouth as a gag. They are then subjected to rape. In quite a lot of cases, they are given a tissue to wipe themselves with, in the hope that that has destroyed any forensic evidence. Going back to Marty Tamboza, there was evidence when the body was found of burnt tissues near the body. Again, another link.
The girls have, on some occasions, they've been dragged down canal banks and into bushes, over fences and hedging. I can't say what mental effect it's had on some of the girls, because it's quite horrific what has happened to them.
They managed to identify various common denominators in these things. The fact they were being taken further and further from where they were abducted. They would wear balaclavas or ski masks, that sort of thing. They normally struck at night and normally in their railway stations.
Where on earth do we go from here? What do we do? Where do we start looking? Who are your suspects? You know, I mean, the fact you've got a murder in Hackney Wick, you've got a murder in Horsley in Surrey, miles apart from each other, and you're now linking these with all the offences that are happening in northwest London. Where do you start looking for your suspects? Where do you start looking?
The forensics back then wasn't the forensics of the 90s and certainly not the forensics of now. So they did have to look at geography, they did have to look at proximity, they did have to look at method, but it really went into 20, 30, 40 rapes. We focus so heavily on DNA nowadays, but again, looking back in the 80s, that really didn't exist. So we relied very heavily as investigators on blood grouping. And there's another element to blood grouping, which is a secretor. A person who actually secretes their blood group into other bodily fluids. They secrete their blood group into semen. So on some of the rapes in around Hampstead, there was evidence of an A secretor being one of the attackers. So somebody with an A blood group who also secreted into their semen.
Unlike the Alison Day case, in the Marty Tamboza case, there was some forensic evidence. There was evidence of an A secretor blood group. Now, immediately that happens, you've got something you can put into the database, and that's a hard fact, and you can start, cross-referencing. There was a cross-reference with one of the London rapes where tissues had been used on the victim the same way. The victim had been tied up in a similar strange fashion, this sort of prayer-like gesture, and the blood group was A secretor. Immediately, you've got a connection. And the connection not only with one of those attacks, but you've actually still got a living victim. You've got a witness who can give you more information about, who this perpetrator was. That's an enormous breakthrough. So a database was drawn up, which was for any men in the London area with any previous history of sexual attacks on women, aged between about 20 and 50, who were A secretor blood groups, which they called the Z men. And there was, a couple of thousand people on it. And it was a case of simply working through that list, talking to these people, establishing alibis, physical descriptions, so on and so forth. And they just went through them one by one, and number 1,594 on that list was an unemployed carpenter from Kilburn who had a charge against him for a serious assault on his wife. And his name was John Francis Duffy.
"15-year-old Marty was savagely attacked as she cycled along this footpath yesterday afternoon. Her fully clothed body was found in a copse.
Alison's body was found by police frogmen making another search of the canal.
This year, so far, the two men have attacked 12 times right across the Greater London area.
Police have one clue. They know he has a minority blood group after their forensic scientists found traces of his blood on one of his victims.
And it was a case of simply working through that list. They just went through them one by one.
It's a massive task. It's a massive task and laborious.
In the early 1980s, I was requested if I'd like to join something called the Heart Inquiry, which I found out was a series of rapes that had been happening in the Hampstead area.
It's the biggest operation of its kind. Police have positively linked 23 attacks. They work together, usually in the evenings or in the night time.
What you would find was there were two men involved, and one was noticeably taller than the other. The taller man was the more dominant and barked some orders around. you could see there was an element of planning involved. I think once that the murders started, you knew that the people who'd been committing these rapes needed more gratification than they were getting from the rapes themselves. Until they were caught, more people were going to die. The people who'd committed these had to be found ASAP. The first day I arrived there, I was given a briefing by the senior investigating officer, and it always sticks in my mind. He did say to me, it's a matter of time because we've got a blood grouping and it's A secreta, PGM, 1+, 1-, and we're going to work on a list of people and we're going to narrow it down until we get to who we need to get to. There were thousands out there. There were thousands of people that would fit that.
We'd drawn together a profile of offenders who were either rapists, had sexual offences against them, and we would then visit every one of those and try to ascertain their movements on the days of the various murders and rapes. So that's how we identified the 3,000 plus that we were going to interview. And these were called the Z-men. The difficulty was we didn't have a particular order in which we could actually address these because we didn't know who the suspect was.
What does your list look like? There's 1,000 dangerous people. How do you prioritise your dangerousness?
Don't forget, we were in a pre-mobile phone, pre-digital age, okay, pre-ANPR, pre-DNA.
This is very basic material, I think, that was coming. It was like, this is Joe Bloggs. He's committed a sexual offence in the past. This is where he lives. Knock on the door, and there's 50 to go and see. And people would knock on doors, eliminate, knock on doors, eliminate.
They just went through them one by one. And number 1,594 on that list was an unemployed carpenter from Kilburn who had a charge against him for a serious assault on his wife. And his name was John Francis Duffy.
John Duffy was in there, so he would get people going round to try and knock on the door, have a quick chat, take a swab, have a chat with him, talk about his movements, and either eliminate or implicate in some way. John Duffy was evasive. Whenever anybody went to try and interview him, he would find a way of never being in. At the time, though, there were so many people on the list, they would just move on to another person. There were so many people to be seen. He was just one of a number of people. There's a real pressure to catch them, but also there's a sense of optimism in some way that someone with that blood grouping will be caught at some stage, but how many people suffer in the meantime?
With any offence where the perpetrator is a serial offender, there's always the thought of, where is this person going to strike next?
She was just a joy to be with. She was a lot of fun, but she was also very, very straight. You know, she would do the right thing. And she was terribly loyal. We knew that Anne wanted to get married. And unfortunately, her father had died and her mother. And she came back to my house one day and she said, I want to ask your dad if he'll give me away. Of course, he was absolutely thrilled to be able to give her away. And it was just a happy time, and she got the man she wanted. They went on honeymoon, and then it was probably a week
after that, if that she went missing.
In 1986, I was the detective inspector at Welling and Hatfield, and it was on the 19th of May that I was on duty. A young lady's gone missing. She'd recently been married. They'd been back a week from honeymoon and had taken the train down to London to go to work. She left the office at 8:30 p.m. Her husband, Lawrence, got home and she wasn't there. So Lawrence drove straight down to Brookman's Park railway station. He watched the train come in and Anne didn't get off that train.
Her usual route home would have been a 10-minute walk to Waterloo Station to catch 2 tube trains connecting with the main line from...
Brookman's Park railway station is in the commuter belt, and during times of commuters it's very busy, but after 8 o'clock at night it becomes a very desolate place. 2 men have been seen in the vicinity.
You've got a young woman, stable background. Everything around her disappearance was ringing alarm bells. Something sinister has happened to her. She's been taken.
I knew something was very wrong because she'd phoned her nan to say, I'm leaving now, at about 7 or 8 or something in the evening, but she didn't turn up. It was not Anne to not let people know where she was. Particularly the loyalty she had to her nan. If she knew she was coming home, she was coming home. Nobody went to bed or anything. We just spent the night driving around looking for her. Very worrying.
So you've got a third young woman in a space of 8 months disappearing close to a railway station, all within a 25-mile radius of London. Is this the third murder in this sequence? The one that we've almost been expecting? We have now got a serial killer on our hands. But unlike the 2 previous cases, there was no body. Where was she?
So we started searching. Brookman's Park is the last frontier from Hertfordshire into the Met, and so we decided we'd choose the Metropolitan Police borders to search to.
There were 5 teams of 6 officers and a sergeant and an inspector on each team. 12-hour shifts. They usually start at about 8 in the morning till 8 at night, and we had to search this entire area completely. So we had to cut through the whole thing. All these bushes had to be trimmed right back with the machetes we had. And the temperature was really hot, dust everywhere. It was very hard work, yeah. And when you look at the size of it, it's quite a daunting task. But we did, and we did the one behind that and the one behind that. I have no idea, I can't even begin to feel that what Mr. Locke was going through, worrying about his wife just vanishing like that. It must have been awful. You know, your loved one goes to work and they suddenly just disappear. The stress he must have been going through must have been awful.
If Anne herself is managing to watch, what would you say to her?
My brain's saying, well, where is she? Because we were literally working towards the borders with the Metropolitan Police and we still haven't found her.
We did 6.5 weeks of searching. The chance of her being alive after a passage of time was very, very slim. When she didn't turn up from work, well, I said to one of the DIs, if she was on the back of the train and got off, was taken up the track, people getting off the train would look forward. You very rarely look behind you when you get off a train. And that's in fact what happened. She came along this path here, over the road bridge, and up into the undergrowth the other side, where she was murdered.
The discovery of Anne Locke's body on a railway embankment has left detectives convinced they're hunting for one man who's killed 3 women and raped at least 3 others. Mrs. Locke's body was badly decomposed, but it was clear she had been suffocated and tied up. According to police, there were sufficient similarities in the way she died to link her murder with 2 others.
I think we were told the body had been found first and then a little while later that it was Anne. I just walked down the garden and just sat at the end, at the bottom of the garden, just numb, really. Just shattering.
Due to a major error in planning the search, there was a breakdown in communication between the Hertfordshire Police and the Metropolitan Police. Both thought each other was going to cover this 200-metre section of embankment, and it didn't get searched, and that was that crucial short distance. That's where a gang of railway plate layers noticed something, and they checked into the undergrowth, and sure enough there was a woman's body, and it was Anne Locke. That 9-week delay had huge consequences in the outcome of the investigation.
At that point of actually finding the body, my heart dropped because I'm thinking, why didn't we find her, and why didn't we find her earlier? Imagine how far forward we would have been if we'd have found Anne's body within a week. The body had deteriorated significantly, that any chances of recovery of any samples was reduced to nil.
When Anne Locke was discovered, I got a phone call and I was invited to be present at the scene and the post-mortem examination.
So you went to the Anne Locke?
I did. If she'd been found sooner, we would have every chance of getting the trace evidence as well, which we needed. Well, Anne Locke's body was in a very decomposed state. She'd been dead for some time. The clothing was more or less falling off her because underneath was mostly skeletonized. You could still see that there was a ligature, although obviously it wasn't tight around her neck because her neck, there's no soft tissue left. She had something which looked like a sock, which appeared to have been placed in her mouth. And it was quite obvious that it wasn't natural causes. The hands were tied, so everything pointed to something like a ligature strangulation.
At this point, with the discovery of Anne Locke's body, we started to move into This is a serial killer. This is a person who's hunting women around railway stations. Within hours, all of our investigation had moved with feed-ins from both Surrey, the Marty Tamboza case, and East London, the Alison Day case. And the whole thing was joined together in what was probably the biggest coordinated investigation since the Ripper.
When it got to suspect 1594, John Francis Duffy, 2 officers visited his house. He wasn't in, left a note saying, please can you ring police station? And he never did. And they left several notes, got nowhere. And eventually it was arranged for him to come in and be interviewed. And he was the first suspect to come in with a solicitor. And he was also the first one to refuse blood samples.
I was at the office on one morning, and 2 of the astute detectives came in and said, Governor, we saw this guy last night, we didn't like him one bit. He was very, very evasive. He's got these laser-like eyes, which was something that had been brought up when we've interviewed the victims of the rapes, that one of the rapists had got these particularly piercing eyes. His name was John Duffy. So we went straight in to see the superintendent, and it was agreed that they would make some inquiries surrounding John Duffy. He'd attacked before. That's how we had his ACE secretor sample.
Duffy's behaviour was definitely something that made us, as a team, very suspicious. I was also aware that John Duffy had turned up at Hampstead at some stage, saying he'd been attacked and lost his memory.
So the officer rang me and saying, you won't believe this, but last night, after we'd interviewed him, the same man, John Duffy, goes into the police station, says he's been attacked. He's been slashed across the chest with a sharp instrument. He's been punched. He says that he's lost his memory. They took him to his home address. He didn't recognise his mum or dad or the dog. And basically, he's now in Free Barnet Hospital in mental care.
Of course, they go to Frye and Barnet, find he can't be spoken to, he's been sectioned. They just have to play a waiting game. By now, Duffy is becoming a stronger and stronger suspect all the time, but he can't be got at because he's in a mental hospital at this point, which is exactly what he was wanting.
Well, I was thinking, we need to interview him, and we can't. And as far as I was concerned, he was a good suspect. John Duffy has got a question mark to him, but we've still got another lot of Z men to get through, and we're still going to continue in that investigation. We always had suspicions there were 2 people involved in the murders and the rapes.
The police had a whole series of rapes that were now being linked to a series of murders. There was huge pressure on them to stop this, to find who was doing it. And so the police at that time were prepared to look at stuff that maybe was only in the experimental stage, but it was worth a try. Let's give it a try, you know? What's to lose? Police were very interested in psychological profiling at this time. It was at the really at the kind of inception of this idea that criminal psychologists could look at the facts behind a series of crimes and make some accurate predictions about the nature, the character, the psychology of the person involved in it.
From the study of the behaviour of criminals, and to build a sort of mathematics around that will allow us to give some hint of the most likely area or series of areas in which an individual may be living.
David Kent was probably the first criminal profiler in the UK. He provided a physical description. He suggested that the rapists were probably loners, that they'd been involved in low-level crime as youngsters and had progressed, and that possibly had a working connection to the railway stations.
This is a man who'll probably have a troubled marriage. He said this is a man who'll probably be a bit narcissistic. He'll be very interested in physical culture, bodybuilding, martial arts. Essentially, he's going to be a fairly small man. You know, he likes to dominate women. It helped them build up a picture of the kind of person that they might be looking for. And it did turn out to be uncannily accurate in the case of John Duffy.
Police can't reach Duffy at the moment, but they've got an interesting suspect here. So the first thing naturally is to try and build up as much information as they can about him. Very quickly, he becomes a more and more interesting suspect. His job as a carpenter for British Rail entitles him to free travel on the rail network. Suddenly, this is a bit of a connection. Secondly, Duffy's hobby, his obsession, is martial arts. That's where the tourniquet connection actually came from. The police found that for the dates of the attacks, and particularly for the murders, they were either unaccounted for or they were annual leave days from his work, or days when he was certified sick. So suddenly, this becomes a very, very interesting suspect indeed.
He was in hospital and there was nothing we could do about it. And we were challenged by that, but what can you do? If a doctor says you can't interview him, you can't interview him. But what we didn't know was that he was actually being released, like on day release. And it transpired on one afternoon, he raped a 14-year-old girl beside a railway line. And again, the victim described his laser eyes, and his description was identical to John Duffy. He then properly fell into the suspect list, and Surrey police provided surveillance on John Duffy.
The surveillance operation on Duffy goes on for about 3 weeks. Gradually during that time, he begins to twig that he's under surveillance, and because of his knowledge of the rail network, he basically makes various attempts to lose himself, either on the tube or on the train. At one point, he even jumps off a train while it's in motion. This is a man who's becoming more and more desperate and more unstable. By now, he wasn't working anymore. He was watching violent pornography. Relationships with almost everybody around him had broken down. His relationship with the ex-wife had become completely wild and unstable. He was also guilty of a violent offence against her new partner. Finally, the team pick him up again, back by the railway line adjoining where the previous attack had taken place. It's late on a Sunday night, and it becomes pretty clear that he's there to attack a woman, and so the decision was made then to swoop and arrest him.
The man was arrested after one of the biggest operations ever mounted by police. Thousands of people have been questioned. All the killings happened near railway lines or stations.
We went to interview him. His whole demeanour was, "You're not going to get me." He would talk to us glibly about martial arts, but all the questions we put to him, he would answer no comment. So it is an arduous interview. He didn't give us anything.
Although no charges have yet been brought, the man was this morning taken from Guildford Police Station to court. Behind closed doors, magistrates granted detectives an extra 36 hours in which to question their suspect. If needs be, police can apply for a further 24 hours before bringing charges or releasing him.
When I interviewed him, he just couldn't look at me. Could not look at me. He displayed a lot of facets of somebody who's guilty, but knew they couldn't break their story. I wasn't there. I don't remember anything because I can't remember any further back than yesterday. I don't remember because I've had amnesia. I've told the story, I'm sticking by it. I'm never going to change. You prove it. It's very frustrating for an investigator.
He was living with his parents sometimes, so a search of that and his flat in Kilburn is conducted. Searching those two properties starts to yield powerful information here. So they find at his flat endless martial arts textbooks, the anarchist cookbook, books with diagrams about tourniquets, how to overpower victims and so on, violent pornography. And at his parents' house, they find a length of string. It's a strange paper-based string, which when it's analysed turns out to be something called somyon. This particular ball of string is an unusual ball of string because it's made of what they call an end strip, which is when the string is coming off a loom, either end is going to be at slightly irregular lengths to the other bits. So therefore, it's a unique ball of string. And when it's checked forensically, it matches exactly to the ball of string which was used to tie up Marty Tamboza. It's come from the same ball of string. So it's another piece of evidence which makes them realise that this has got to be the man.
Having met him, having read all the statements, gathered the evidence, presented a case ready for interview, I was convinced he was quite capable of a murder and those rapes. He was put on identity parades where he was picked out, and then based on the evidence, he was charged with the Alison Day, the Marty Tamboza murder, and the murder of Anne Locke.
Duffy used his knowledge of London's rail system to shrewdly plan his rapes and murders. He's accused of starting a 2.5-year trail of attacks. In December 1985, it's alleged that Duffy moved further out to Hackney Wick and turned from rapist to murderer.
There was always something in the back of my head, and many detectives, that John Duffy didn't act alone on the murders, and we knew he didn't act alone on the rapes. In the rape statements, there were two men. There's always something that worried me about Marty Tamboza's murder, and the man running up to a train that was described didn't look like Duffy. And there was also something that disturbed me about the disappearance and murder of Anne Locke, when there was a witness that said they'd seen two men tugging at the sleeves of a woman.
The next thing to do is to look at his known associates, and the only person who is screaming out as his associate is the person who was at school with him, did martial arts training with him, went jogging with him, and had committed petty crime with him since they were children, David Mulcahy.
Duffy and Mulcahy went to school together. They grew up together and they were both bullied at school, which drew them together in a stronger bond. We know that they were committing offences as youngsters, as teenagers. They also tortured a hedgehog, beating it to death with a plank. We also know they were firing air guns at victims in the street, and they were planning burglaries.
So David Mulcahy is brought in for questioning, and it's a very, very different experience this time. Unlike Duffy, Mulcahy has got plenty to say, but none of it committal. He's arrogant, he's cocky, he's very cocksure. You can ask me anything.
He denied any involvement. He said that he hadn't been out with Duffy for a long time. We, as a result of interviewing John Duffy's wife, know that David Mulcahy was still in contact with him. They would go out together. You think there is definitely two people involved in these offences. There was a man seen on the bridge on the night of Anne's disappearance. A man who had quite a long face, long hair and a high forehead. A taller man than the first, something that we thought was significant. We do know from the rapes that one of them was particularly more violent than the other. And in fact, the violence seemed to be more indicative of his attacks than the sexual elements, or that he was aroused by the violence.
We always fancied Mulcahy as the second person. But what do you do with no evidence? No confession? Nothing.
Basically, we put up on an ID parade with those witnesses that we thought might be able to pick him out, and he wasn't. He wasn't picked out. I was angry because, having analysed all the evidence, he displayed a lot of facets of somebody who's guilty. But John Duffy wasn't saying anything. There wasn't enough evidence upon which to charge David Mulcahy. So the case went ahead against John Duffy.
We couldn't have a funeral for a little while because they had to keep her for a while. We did finally get one. It was the people who had been to her wedding were at the funeral, and it was at the same church, and the same vicar. 3 months before, he'd stood there and married them. And now here we are at a funeral. And that is just hard for everyone to deal with.
I was pleased that we'd identified Duffy. We could prove the Alison Day case because there were samples of fibre on Alison Day's body, even though she'd been in the river, that related to Duffy, and also because of the som yarn in relation to Marty Tamboza. But I was still a bit bereft that because of the deterioration of the body, there wasn't sufficient evidence against Anne Locke, although the full evidence was being sort of joined together of the 3 murders to support the Anne Locke case. I was always concerned that it would be insufficient. I can't ever deny that.
Prosecution counsel Tony Hooper QC has just started outlining details of the killings to the jury. He started with the case of Alison Day. He said she was strangled with her own clothing.
The trial of John Duffy in January 1988 was aided greatly by a couple of key witnesses. One of them was Duffy's ex-wife, who came forward and presented to the court the catalogue of crimes against her during her marriage, and how the marriage had actually been a journey from Duffy being, in her words, a nice person to becoming a complete maniac and a sadist. The other key witness was Duffy's friend, who he had used to beat him up and slash his chest with a knife, and then he would claim he had amnesia and didn't remember anything. That destroyed Duffy's amnesia alibi.
Mr. Hooper said that Duffy had set the assault up and his claim of memory loss was a sham. He said Duffy was a cold, calculated man who knew what he was doing.
I was at the Old Bailey when John Duffy went on trial. You know, he was quite measured. When he was asked any questions, he was almost timid. Only a handful of his rape victims, and maybe only 4 or 5, give evidence. It would have been an ordeal.
There was tremendous bravery shown. I can't even begin to imagine how traumatic that would be for them.
Lawrence Locke, Anne Locke's husband, was accompanied to court by his father. In fact, one of the police officers told his father to probably wait outside, not go into the gallery, because the evidence was going to be disturbing.
In the witness box today, her widower was asked by defence counsel David Farrington if he was given rather a hard time by police. Mr. Locke replied, "In my opinion, yes." Later, Mr. Justice Farquharson intervened to say he had been passed a message saying Mr. Locke's father had collapsed outside the courtroom. Mr. Locke, who slammed down his statements and dashed out, pale and distressed, was given a police escort.
His father had collapsed with a heart attack in the foyer of the Old Bailey. His father was rushed to hospital but was dead on arrival. And while Lawrence Locke was away at the hospital, It was then that the judge made the decision to not continue with the Anne Locke side of the investigation.
Today, Mr. Justice Farquharson told the jury he believed there was insufficient evidence to bring in a guilty verdict in respect of Anne Locke. The judge said the prosecution claimed the manner of her death was so similar to that of the other women, it must be the same man. He said that could not be justified, and he'd be asking the jury to find Duffy not guilty of Anne's murder.
I remember being told that, and I was pretty devastated. I understood how the judicial system works. I knew because of double jeopardy that we couldn't ever charge Duffy with the murder of Anne Locke again.
I was in my car and I heard it on the radio, and I had to pull over quickly just to sort of let it sink in. That was difficult to deal with because our Anne hadn't got any justice, it felt like. I think, having to then deal with that as well, I think, on top of losing her and then the fact that it's just sort of open-ended is very difficult.
This morning he sent them out to consider verdicts on 13 counts. He said the brutal and callous killings of 19-year-old Alison Day and 15-year-old Marty Tamboza were bound to provoke strong reaction, but the jury had to approach the cases coldly and clinically.
At the end of the trial, John Duffy was found guilty of a number of rapes. The judge said he had never seen one man brought before him charged with so many rapes and murders. He was found guilty of the murder of Alison Day. He was found guilty of the murder of Marty Tamboza, but he was found not guilty on the murder of Anne Locke.
I do remember there being some quite low-key mutterings of approval from the public gallery, but I don't remember him reacting. I sort of got the impression that I thought there was almost an acceptance by him of his situation, and I think that he knew that this was the end of the road and in many respects the end of his life.
I was working at Whitemoor in 1997, and I was actually at that time a wing-based psychologist. A prison officer just popped into my office and said, I've got somebody who's experiencing nightmares and wants to see you. The officer said, it's the railway murderer. In that first interview, he so clearly did want to talk. One of the things he expressed that day was that he was very afraid of talking. He was so overwhelmed by the offences he'd committed.
When Duffy is talking to Jenny Cutler, he starts off by saying, I've done some terrible things and I want to clear it off my chest. He then starts going into details of the various offences he has committed.
During that, he was telling me about someone that he'd committed offences with. This is a record. It contains my contemporaneous notes from my interviews with John Duffy at H&P Whitemoor. It was very much teamwork. Everything they ever did was teamwork, even from school days. while he was raping her just under the bridge. A man was walking up the canal pathway on the other side of the canal. They could see him quite clearly. He walked past. If he'd looked over, he would have seen them. He can't remember any decision or debate that this would be a killing.
I knew that John Duffy was speaking to Jenny Cutler. I was excited in some way to think that we might find out what Duffy had done. I wasn't sure what John Duffy's motivation would be about talking to a woman about the sexual crimes he'd committed. I must admit, my cynicism told me, to a certain extent, that John Duffy would take some satisfaction out of doing that he could see the horror in someone's face as he told them about his crimes.
We'd been talking for quite a while, and I said, "Oh, which prison is your code E in?" Which is a sort of prison term for a co-defendant, and you wouldn't expect someone's co-defendant to be in the same prison. And he said, "Well, he's not in prison. He's never been arrested."
And he says during the confession, I wasn't alone with this. I was with my friend, David Mulcahy. They'd been friends since they were 11 years old, and they both started school together. It would appear that Duffy, quite a slight little guy, got picked on by other children. Mulcahy became his sort of guardian angel. They would go up onto Hampstead Heath, which was their playground, and they would jump out on courting couples just to frighten the living daylights out of them.
John Duffy recalled at the age of 9 and 11 a game where they would chase a girl and catch her, and as they got older they would, sort of squeeze her breasts. I've never assessed David Mulcahy, but in my experience from working with sexual offenders, I would see that as a reflection of a later sexual preference for rape scenarios.
I always knew there was a person called David Mulcahy who'd never been convicted of the crimes that John Duffy had been convicted of.
Although there was strong suspicions from the original team that Mulcahy was Duffy's partner, there was never any evidence to convict him. In fact, he was never charged.
I was interested to know if he was still offending.
We started to look at Mulcahy, and there was nothing out of the ordinary for him. He was living his life, he'd been working, he was with his wife, they had their house in Hampstead. He was living an ordinary life.
We carried out surveillance on him. Nothing to suspect that anything was untoward, and he was just a normal member of society.
So, running alongside that, Duffy was still undergoing initially his psychological debriefing with Jenny. So we had Duffy's account, and that was really useful.
I was sending that information on to the police. In those days, you faxed everything, so I was faxing sheets of handwritten notes to the police. John perfectly understood that the work wasn't confidential. John remembers going out in the car with David. David was driving and playing Michael Jackson's Thriller album. David would play this tape when they were going out. It was an unspoken symbol of their agreement for action or offending. It was their trigger. He used to rewind the track Thriller and replay it. It made them both feel aroused. They were buzzing. Their adrenaline was going. They normally just drove to where David's thoughts would take him.
Mulcahy's address was searched. Michael Jackson's Thriller tape was found at his address after all these years. Duffy was saying that one of the cars that they used to go round in was Duffy's Alpha Sud. A photograph was found at his home address of an Alpha Sud as Duffy had explained it.
Well, I know at that point there was a gasp from us, almost like yes.
I think my views at the time were really clear. If there's a killer and a dangerous person out there, they have to be dealt with. They have to be taken off the street. I was anxious, and I was hearing the information coming back from Duffy. I'm saying, what's he saying? What's he saying? Everything was anxiety driven, really, because the stakes were so high. David Mulcahy is and was a killer, and he was free. So all I could see was a long road ahead.
It was a really difficult, complex case right from the word go.
The way we investigated rapes in the 80s wasn't the way that they would be investigated in the 90s, and investigations in the 90s are probably not how we investigate now. In the 90s, DNA was just coming in.
They are calling it a revolutionary new technique, DNA testing that can individually profile a suspect to 1 in 1,000 million.
Let's assume there's been rigorous contact between individuals. If you can pinpoint that, for example, a strap or a belt being pulled, then you test that, recover material from that, and get DNA profiles from that.
New DNA methods obviously set us off on a huge reinvestigation of the 80s offences. We researched the old inquiry, identified Mulcahy as being the probable second person involved with Duffy. So it was logical that we checked that out.
We looked to see whether any exhibits still existed from the old inquiry, and there was a couple of items of underwear belonging to 2 of the victims, which we submitted to the laboratory for DNA. It was then decided, let's interview Mulcahy as a suspect. He wasn't told that Duffy was implicating him.
He came along, refused to speak during interviews. He had to give a DNA sample, but it was reluctantly given.
He was asked to supply a mouth swab, which he refused, but then pulls a great tuft of hair out of his head and uses words to the effect is, "Will that do?" And it was an act of bravado, as far as I could see, to pull this great tuft of hair out of his head. Mulcahy must have thought, after Duffy was arrested, charged, convicted, it was only a matter of time before he was scooped up. And I think with the passage of time, possibly this explains some of Mulcahy's arrogance. He thought he was beyond reproach. After all this time, nah, they haven't got anything on me. Having supplied the sample, he was released, and the sample was sent off to the laboratory for examination.
John did talk about David's verbal aggression to women. He talked about David threatening women with knives. David was saying, "Keep quiet, I told you not to talk." John raped her. After he'd finished, David gave John the car keys and said, "Get the car, bring it round." John started going and David said, "Take your time about it." David came towards him on the left. David was very excited. His eyes were ablaze. It looked like he was really pumped up.
The more you look at it, I am wholly convinced that the ringleader was Mulcahy, a much stronger character, and Duffy was quite happy to go along with it for the excitement.
During the re-investigation, I had a phone call from one of the forensic scientists who was looking at the fence for us, and they said, "Hi Andy, I've got some news for you. Can you remember that guy Mulcahy?" "Yeah." I said, "Well, Mulcahy's DNA matches one of the victims from the 1980s. That was on a Tuesday, Wednesday afternoon. Wasn't the phone call I was expecting.
So now we had DNA evidence against Mulcahy, backed up by Duffy confiding his past misdemeanours, naming Mulcahy as his accomplice on the rapes and the murders.
There were quite a lot of high-level meetings taking place between forces. Surrey had a successful conviction of John Duffy. They were anxious about whether John Duffy would try and put something forward that would challenge his own conviction.
It was like trying to climb Everest with a pair of training shoes on. You know, where do you start?
So it would have been much easier if Duffy had just said, you know, he woke up one day and said, "Can I talk to the police officer and I want to confess everything to him?" We had Jenny Cutler's notes, but Jenny Cutler is not a police officer, she's not an investigator.
It's a very daunting place, HMP Whitemoor. It sits out there in the fens. As you're driving out in this fen country, you see it in the distance, this bleak place. There's nothing for miles. And the next thing, you end up in this secure area. And I remember there being like a little panel in the door, like a porthole, and it was reinforced glass, and seeing this dude looking at us, and it was him. And I thought, oh, there he is. Here we go.
So Matt, he had a very difficult job because to work with John Duffy, to me, you're working with a psychopathic killer. To Matt, to a certain extent, he had to work with Duffy on the level that was conversational, that was going to allow Duffy to open up and talk to him.
I mean, I didn't have the closeness that Jenny Cutler did with him because I'm not a female. I'm a big, ugly male, right? And I'm a police officer. The powers to be were asking for matters to be clarified, for him to be more concise, more specific. We all had roles, and he was my role. He responds well to having a buddy. I don't want to label myself as like, oh, I've become Mulcahy, but we had this somewhat of an understanding. It was him and I, you know, against the world.
And he had to listen to be honest, horrific, almost nonchalant accounts by Duffy, who was able to say, yeah, I did all these things.
"15-year-old Marty was savagely attacked as she cycled along this footpath yesterday afternoon. Her fully clothed body was found a mile from where the bike was dumped. It had been partially burned.
Tamboza case was particularly difficult. I remember these scene pictures and these woods, you know, it was a very picturesque place in Surrey. It was almost like a cat with a mouse. They were playing with her. The next thing that they're escorting her off into the wooded area. They rape her. And in the end, they batter her to death with a block or a rock, attempted to set her body on fire. And it was just like, you know, this is just vile. All the time, he's telling us this stuff. You know, I'm thinking, there's people like him out there. You just think, oh my God, you know. There were family members that had been victimised by the actions of these two. I wanted them to see justice.
We didn't want Mulcahy to find out about it because he had been quite happily sort of getting on with his life for some years. He obviously thought that it was a done thing. Duffy had gone to prison, he'd escaped any scrutiny, he'd sort of been arrested, he'd been let go.
Time was against us. So every day we woke up thinking, this might be in the press tomorrow if this in some way gets out, that this inquiry's going on. We were really anxious about the media finding out about this, because the consequence of the media finding out would be that they would go live with it.
We go back and arrest Mulcahy. He was very cocky, extremely cocky. He was making no comment to every question that was put to him.
And it's not like on the telly. It's a slog. It's long hours. There's an investigator. All you can do is follow where the investigation takes it.
Do you know the Hampstead area? No comment. Do you know this road in Hampstead where an offence had happened? No comment. The longer the interviews went on, his arrogance came across. And I think in his own mind, he thought he was going to walk out of this. A nasty, nasty piece of work. I asked him if he knew what DNA was. Again, he said no comment. I then informed him that his DNA had been found on an exhibit from a rape that had occurred on Hampstead Heath in the early 80s. He started to gag and choke. He then threw up, which I managed to catch in the waste paper bin that was in the interview room. I just wish it had been on the tape, quite honestly. It would have been wonderful.
We actually had him in a position where he was telling us about his actions, albeit historical.
It sounds great. You've now got a witness who's telling you, this is what happened, this is what we did, and this is who I was with. But that man is a convicted serial rapist, a convicted murderer. So from our point of view in terms of Duffy as a credible witness, forget it. He wasn't. He really wasn't. During the original investigation, he has openly admitted that he's lied about getting amnesia so that he didn't have to give evidence either to the police or at the court. He's lied at the Old Bailey when he's pleaded not guilty and put victims through a trial. He's been convicted. He's now in prison.
Instead of accepting as gospel everything that Duffy was saying, teams went out. If he had said, I don't know, whatever, team would go out tasked with that specific job. Did that happen? If it didn't, what did happen? Because if we don't discredit him, he could well be discredited in court.
If we could prove that Duffy was lying and still a liar, then he would never be any good as a witness.
Duffy was brought out of custody and taken to scene visits of all the 12 rapes and the 3 murders, and filled in gaps that no one ever knew before. It could only have been him that knew it.
To be horribly specific, he could even tell you about the size of the wall they may have bent a victim over when they raped them. And at a later stage, attended that scene, and that said wall was there, and that the height of the wall was the height he said, and it was where he said it was. There was one particular one involving 2 Danish au pairs. And they'd been abducted by Mulcahy and Duffy and dragged into bushes in a wooded area there.
Duffy was saying, well, I went over there with one of them and Mulcahy went over there with the other one, etc.
And there's no way on God's earth anyone could have prompted him with this information, intelligence or fact, unless you'd done it yourself.
The 2 Danish au pairs both went back, they got on with their lives. Then, if you can imagine it, out of the blue, they get a phone call from the police in London saying, we've caught someone who we believe is the second person that was involved in the attack.
It's a huge ask to go back to people when they have been through the trauma of actually being raped themselves, because it's not as simple as just telling your story, of course, because you relive it.
We're now opening up this Pandora's box and asking them not only to relive it all, but to actually come to the UK and stand in the witness box at the Central Criminal Court.
They were tremendously brave and courageous in agreeing to come forward and agreeing to help the prosecution.
there was confidence that we could charge Mulcahy with 12 specific rapes and 3 murders.
I was satisfied that we had done everything we feasibly could within the timescales we had given to us. But we still had to get the women along to give evidence. How would they react to seeing Mulcahy all those years on?
Whilst I was relieved we were on the right road all along with David Mulcahy, the journey ahead of us was momentous. It's massive.
It was a very cold winter, a very bleak winter. And I can remember on the first day going to court number 1 at the Old Bailey. The whole atmosphere in that court was electric. It just felt like a lot of people had waited years for this trial.
The first day of trial is always quite important because there had been such a long run up to it, and at times it felt that we were never going to get to trial.
It was the first time a Category A prisoner had given evidence against somebody in those circumstances to bring somebody else to justice. So the stakes were very, very high.
And as I wandered round, my eyes gazed around, I saw this guy sitting there, scribbling. And I assumed he was a court reporter or something, so I just sort of looked away, and then it suddenly occurred to me, I thought, well, where's the defendant? And then suddenly the penny dropped that was David Mulcahy. That was him. And he just looked so unremarkable.
I had to go to give evidence, and I think I was there for about 3 or 4 days. It's quite scary seeing them there. You think when people do these sorts of things that they're going to, have horns coming out of their heads or, but they don't. They're just ordinary looking people. You'd pass them on the street.
Mulcahy was sitting scribbling on this pad for ages all the time, and then occasionally he'd do this thing. If a particularly damning piece of evidence was coming out in the cross-examination, he would pause and he would look up from his pad and sort of look very intently at what was happening. And then as soon as the person in the witness box gave the answer, he would bolt forward and start scribbling frantically like this. And the jury would sort of look as if to go, what was that? And it was obviously to give the impression of, well, that was completely wrong and I can prove it.
Duffy told the same story, and he did it in a way that was very calm and cold, probably, which added to the drama because it sort of felt detached. Somebody was just telling a story, but the story was of horrific, traumatic crimes. I don't think I've ever experienced anything like it, nor ever will.
I had one goal, and that was conviction, the result. We were going to convict Duffy, and we were going to use Duffy's evidence to convict David Mulcahy. You're there to the very last second with him, till he goes up into the dock, just hoping and praying that he's going to do his bit. It was tough because you just didn't know if he was going to perform.
What was important was Duffy not just revealed the truth about Mulcahy, but he also admitted to other offences which he hadn't been prosecuted for. So that was really important, that not only he admitted that, but he pleaded guilty to those.
When Duffy was spoken to by police officers from day one, he was told in no uncertain terms, no deal can be struck. You are serving life imprisonment, which means life. You will never come out. It's always important because you can then get a cross-allegation, if you like. Yeah, what did the police promise you? How much did they pay you to say what you've said?
It was hard because I didn't know up until the second trial that she'd been raped by Duffy. It was painful, it was shocking. I think I was also hopeful that this would finally be the end. We might finally get a conviction.
The rapes, many of which took place near Hampstead, had been terrible offences which had had a very grave effect on the victims, some of whom gave evidence.
They've been remarkable. I mean, having to come back to court after all this time, 15 years.
I got nothing but praise and admiration for them, for what they did, and the courage that they displayed.
The trial turned out to be one of the longest murder trials, so well over 6 months. All told, it was quite a lengthy process. It is horribly anxious when the announcement comes that the jury have got a verdict and you're all going to court. It is a horrible moment because you just think, I don't know what they are going to come back with.
When the verdicts came in, the atmosphere in that courtroom was extraordinary. I mean, it was so dramatic.
Who knows what goes on in a jury room? And when they came back guilty on all counts, it summed up the whole thing. And everyone was very, very, well, pleased to say the least.
As the judge delivered the sentence, Mulcahy gave no reaction, staring straight ahead. The judge told him these were sadistic killings, and of the two of you, I have no doubt it was you who derived gratification from the act of killing.
And as he walked away, he looked across at two of the victims that were sitting in the public gallery and smirked at them. You know, it was just a last sort of desperate act of sort of intimidation, revenge, whatever. And then he was led away.
In 1986, with the arrest of John Duffy, the police brought about the end of a series of the most horrific rapes and murders this country has ever seen. Today's verdict will ensure David Mulcahy never has the opportunity to terrorise the streets of London again.
In terms of the three murders, obviously we had convictions against Duffy, but for Anne's family, for Lawrence Locke, nobody had ever been convicted of Anne's murder. And to be able to actually convict Mulcahy, I hope was hugely important, to allow them to at least carry life on with the door partially closed.
When the trial judge did his summing up, he thanked me for my work. And the officer that had come with John from Whitemore said, all those little chats paid off. And I think I probably have that as my epitaph on my headstone. All those little chats paid off.
Excitement doesn't come into it. You felt deflated in a way, I suppose. In as much as you think, we've done it. What do we do now? You know, what a way to go out. And that was it, my swan song. This is a letter from Mr. D. Mulcahy, Majesty's Prison, Full Sutton. I continue to challenge my conviction for one simple fact. I did not commit these horrific crimes. It's a very simple thing to say, but a very hard one for people to believe me. The mainstay of the evidence against me is from a self-proclaimed liar. He was my friend, and I should have seen what he was, a monster. Yours truthfully, David Mulcahy. There's no remorse in there whatsoever. It's a letter from a convicted killer, a convicted rapist, and these are the words that he would have used back in 1999. He's clutching at straws. He knows what he's done. It's pathetic, really pathetic, and I think it sums up him for what he is, a sad, pathetic person. And where he is at the moment is where he should stay for the rest of his life.
I think as an investigator you feel some sort of gladness. There's satisfaction of a job well done.
It wasn't for glory. I just did my job.
There was tremendous bravery shown by these victims. They put a lot of faith in us. That was something that I felt we needed to live up to. And I hope now that some peace is given to the people who've suffered so badly at the hands of these monsters.